The veil was borrowed. So was the dress. Nothing in that church belonged to me, not the flowers, not the guests, not even the man standing beside me with his hands folded like he was at a funeral instead of a wedding. "You may kiss the bride." I didn't move. Gabriel Cortez turned, looked at me the way a man looks at a contract he hasn't finished reading, and pressed his mouth to my cheek instead of my lips. The priest blinked. Someone in the second row laughed behind a gloved hand. My face burned hotter than it had all day, hotter than the candles, hotter than the shame of walking down an aisle to pay off a dead man's debt. I had expected many things from Gabriel Cortez. Cruelty. Silence. Indifference dressed up as ownership. I had not expected that 3 hours later I would find him kneeling on my workroom floor with a box of pastels in his hand, asking in a voice I'd never heard him use, "Which one did you want first?" That wasn't supposed to happen. Not to a woman he'd bought. 6 weeks earlier, I'd been mixing varnish over a cracked 19th century portrait in my father's restoration workshop on the edge of the old quarter when 2 men in dark coats walked in without knocking. "Isabel Hartley?" "Who's asking?" "Your father owed Mr. Cortez $350,000. He's dead." "The debt isn't." My hands went still over the canvas in front of me. "My father's been dead 8 months. Why is this the first I'm hearing of it?" "Because Mr. Cortez is a patient man." The taller one set an envelope on the counter, careful not to wrinkle it. Not an endless one. Inside, a number that made my knees weak, and a single typed sentence at the bottom. "The debt can be settled in full. Marriage." Nothing else discussed. I laughed an ugly, disbelieving sound right up until I looked up the name Cortez and understood, in the space of 4 search results, exactly what kind of man was asking to own me. I'd spent my whole life being underestimated. The quiet girl behind the restoration table, the one who fixed other people's ruined paintings and never got asked to sign her own name to anything. I'd buried both parents by 26, kept the workshop alive on turpentine and stubbornness, and never once let anyone see me cry where they could use it against me. I wasn't going to start with a crime boss. "Tell him," I said, sliding the envelope back across the counter, "that I'll come. But I'm not grateful, and I'm not afraid." The man in black had almost smiled. "Mr. Cortez doesn't ask for gratitude, Miss Hartley. He asked for a signature." I met Gabriel Cortez for the first time in an office that smelled like cedar and gun oil, 4 floors above a logistics company everyone in the city knew wasn't just a logistics company. He didn't stand when I walked in. Didn't offer coffee. Didn't apologize for the 2 guards at the door. "You understand the terms," he said. "Not a question. I understand you're buying a wife instead of forgiving a debt out of some kindness that clearly isn't in you." Something flickered behind his eyes. Not anger. Interest, like I was the first thing in that office that had talked back. "My kindness isn't for sale, Miss Hartley. Only my patience is running out." "Then let's not waste any more of it." I sat down across from him without being asked, spine straight, chin level with his. "I'll marry you. I won't pretend to love you, and you will never touch me without asking first." The room went very quiet. One of the guards near the door shifted his weight like he expected the ceiling to fall in on me for saying it. Gabriel studied me for a long moment. "Agreed," he said finally, and something in his voice, some crack I wasn't meant to hear, suggested he hadn't expected to be the one negotiated with. I left that office with a wedding date and the distinct, unsettling sense that I'd just surprised the most dangerous man in the city. The house was enormous and cold the way old money is cold, marble floors that swallowed sound, staff that moved like ghosts, a bed in a room I hadn't chosen with a door that locked from the inside, which I noticed the second I walked in. I locked it. I sat on the edge of that bed, still in my borrowed dress, waiting for the knock that would tell me the terms of our agreement had already been forgotten. It never came. Instead, an hour later, a single soft knock. "Miss Hartley." His voice through the door. "There's food outside your room if you're hungry." You don't have to open the door tonight or any night, until you decide otherwise. I stood frozen, one hand on the lock, staring at the door like it might change its answer if I waited long enough. I didn't open it. But I didn't sleep, either, not for a long time, turning his voice over in my mind, trying to find the trick in it and not finding one. He'd heard everything I didn't say, and answered it anyway. The first 3 weeks, Gabriel Cortez was a ghost in his own house. Meals left at my door. A car and driver offered, never insisted on. A standing order to his staff, which I overheard by accident: Mrs. Cortez is not staff. She gives no orders. She takes none either, unless she asks first. I still hated the walls of that house. But I noticed the way a woman notices things she's not supposed to be noticing, that he never once broke his word. The first crack in my armor came on a Tuesday. I'd gone into the city alone, against his driver's advice, against every instinct the guards clearly had, to buy pigment for a restoration piece I'd secretly kept taking on. It was the only thing that still felt like mine in that entire gilded house. 2 men followed me from the art supply shop to the parking garage. I recognized the look in their eyes before I recognized the danger, the look men give a woman when they've decided she's worth less than the things in her hands. Mrs. Cortez, the shorter one said, smiling with all his teeth. Gabriel's got himself a pretty little wife. Bet he doesn't even know you're here. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I gripped the palette knife in my bag the way I'd gripped it through 8 months of grief and said, "Get out of my way." They didn't. Gabriel did. He was there before I understood how, car doors still swinging open behind him, coat catching the wind, and the temperature of the entire garage dropped 10 degrees the second he spoke. "Say her name again," he said quietly to the shorter man, "and it will be the last thing you say." Neither man moved. Neither man breathed for what felt like a very long time. Then they were gone, not running exactly, but close enough. Gabriel turned to me, and for the first time I saw something underneath the ice. Fear. Not for himself. "You're not hurt," he said. Not a question. But his hands hovered near my shoulders like he needed to check anyway. "I'm fine." My voice shook more than I wanted it to. I had it handled. "I know." A muscle moved in his jaw. I still couldn't stay in that car. I didn't have an answer for that. Neither, it seemed, did he. After that day, something between us loosened, degree by degree, like ice releasing a window in the first week of spring. He started eating dinner across from me instead of in his study. He asked, without being asked, what colors I worked in most, and 3 days later a set of hand-ground ultramarine pigment appeared in my workroom with no note attached. I knew it was him anyway, because no one else in that house paid enough attention to know ultramarine was the one color I could never afford for myself. I learned things about him nobody in the city seemed to know. That he read poetry he'd never admit to owning. That he flinched almost imperceptibly at the sound of glass breaking and never explained why. That he was unbearably gentle with the old housekeeper, Rosa, who'd worked for his mother before she worked for him, carrying her grocery bags himself, refusing to let her climb the tall ladder in the pantry. Dangerous to the world, soft only for the people the world had forgotten. I hadn't asked to notice that. I noticed it anyway. There was a stretch of that first month, before any of the tenderness started, that I never told anyone about, not Rosa, not Gabriel, not even myself in the honest hours before sleep. I would stand at the tall window of my room, looking down at a garden I hadn't asked for, and rehearse silently all the ways I might have refused the marriage entirely. I could have run. I could have gone to the police, though I suspected, correctly, that half the police in that city already answered to men like Gabriel Cortez. I could have let the debt collectors take the workshop, the only inheritance my father had left me besides his mistakes, and started over somewhere with no name attached to mine at all. I stayed instead, and told myself for weeks that it was only ever about the money, the workshop, the 350,000 reasons a woman might marry a stranger and call it practical. It took me longer than I wanted to admit to recognize the day that reasoning had quietly stopped being true, sometime between the parking garage and the pastels. Somewhere in the small, unremarkable accumulation of a man keeping his word to me, again and again, when he had no real reason left to keep pretending he cared whether he did. The night of the parking garage, I came home shaking in a way I refused to name, curled on the settee in my workroom with my knees to my chest, staring at a blank sheet of paper I couldn't bring myself to touch yet. Gabriel found me there an hour later. He didn't ask why I was still awake. He sat down on the floor across from me, not beside me, careful of the space I hadn't invited him into, and set something small on the low table between us. A box of pastels. "Rosa said you always did this when you were upset," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Before. When your mother was sick. She said your father told her once." I stared at him. "You asked Rosa about my mother." "I asked Rosa what you needed. She said your hands. That you used to sketch when your hands needed something to do that wasn't crying." He turned the box over once, awkward in a way that looked foreign on a man who never looked foreign doing anything. "I don't know how to do this. But I didn't want you sitting up here alone. You don't have to." "I know I don't." He was already reaching for the sketchbook on the table, careful, waiting a full 3 seconds for me to pull away before he touched it at all. "Tell me if I'm doing it wrong." He was doing it wrong. His hands were steadier holding a gun than a stick of charcoal, and the first line he drew went crooked across the page, and he swore under his breath in a language I didn't recognize. And I, despite everything, despite the debt in the door with the lock and the 8 months of grief, laughed. It surprised us both. "You're terrible at this," I said. "I've been told I'm terrible at several things." He didn't look up. "This is a new one." I let him finish the page. He never once looked at me like I owed him anything for it. 2 weeks after that, on a morning when the house was quiet and the guards had been sent ahead to the docks, Gabriel found me hunched over my restoration table before sunrise, dark circles under my eyes, chasing a deadline for a commission I'd taken in secret, half convinced he'd disapprove of me working at all when he had more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. He didn't disapprove. He pulled a chair up beside me instead, silent, and watched my hands move over the canvas the way other men watch fires burn, like there was something hypnotic in it he didn't fully understand and didn't want to interrupt. "You don't have to sell your work," he said finally. "I could buy out whatever's left of your father's debts to other vendors. You'd never have to restore another painting for money again." "I know you could." I didn't look up from the seam of color I was matching. "That's exactly why I'm not going to let you." "Why not?" "Because this is the only thing in my life that's still mine, Gabriel. Everything else got decided for me. My father's debt. This marriage, this house. If you take the workshop away too, even out of kindness, there won't be anything left." "That's Isabel," I added, instead of Mrs. Cortez. He was quiet for a long moment, turning that over. "Then I won't take it," he said. "But will you let me carry the pigments home at least? Or is that also something I'm not allowed to touch?" I laughed, surprised again by how easily he could still do that to me. "You may carry the pigments." He carried far more than pigments after that. He learned, without being told twice, which deliveries needed guarding and which didn't, quietly assigning one of his most trusted men to walk 2 blocks behind me whenever I went to the art district alone, never close enough to hover, always close enough to matter. I noticed. I never mentioned it. And he never confirmed it. Somehow that unspoken arrangement became its own private language between us, the kind married couples build over decades that we'd somehow built in a matter of weeks. There was an evening not long after when I found him standing in the doorway of my workroom, holding a small wooden easel I didn't recognize, turning it over in his hands like it was something breakable. "It was my mother's," he said before I could ask. "She used to paint, too, before my father's business made that unnecessary. I don't think anyone's touched this in 20 years. He set it down carefully near my table, like an offering he wasn't sure would be accepted. "I thought you might use it better than it's been used, sitting in a closet gathering dust." I ran my hand along the old wood, worn smooth at the corners from decades of careful hands. "Tell me about her," I said quietly. And he did, haltingly at first, then less so, sitting on the low stool by my window while I worked. Telling me about a woman who taught her sons to set a table properly and recite poetry from memory, who died before she ever saw what her older son would become, who might have loved me instantly, he said, for the exact reason his own board found me threatening, because I never once flinched at him. It became a habit after that. Evenings in the workroom, my hands busy, his voice low, both of us slowly filling in the outlines of two lives that had collided by force and were now, without either of us quite admitting it out loud, choosing each other one quiet hour at a time. It couldn't last. 2 weeks later, I was in the east hallway when I heard my own name in a voice that wasn't Gabriel's. His cousin, Renzo, the one with the gambling debts and the smile that never reached his eyes. 350,000 for a restorer's daughter, Gabriel. People are laughing at you behind your back. You could have just paid off her father's debt and let her disappear. Instead, you married the girl. What is this really about? A long silence. Then Gabriel's voice, low and controlled in a way that told me he was furious. "Careful, Renzo. I'm only saying what the whole family's thinking. First you go soft over her. Now you're sitting with her sketchbooks like some love-struck teenager. Men are starting to wonder if the wife runs this house now. That's dangerous for you. It's dangerous for her. That's enough. Is it true you told the dock crew to reroute the Doyle shipment because she said something about the noise keeping her up? Since when does Gabriel Cortez rearrange his business for a woman's sleep schedule?" I didn't wait to hear the answer. I walked away fast, chest tight, the warmth of the last 2 weeks curdling into something cold and familiar. Of course I'd let myself forget, for a handful of days, that I was a liability with a wedding ring on it, a weakness other men could see and use against him. I'd let myself believe the pastels meant something, when really it might only mean he was slipping and everyone around him could see it happening. That night, when he knocked at my workroom door with a small paper bag, a new color, I realized later, one I'd mentioned once in passing, I didn't answer. "Isabel." A pause. "I know you're in there." "I'm tired," I said through the door. Not a lie, exactly. Another pause, longer. "All right," he said finally. And I heard him set the bag down outside my door and walk away. And I actively hated, how much that quiet retreat hurt to hear. For 4 days, the house went cold again. Meals in silence. Gabriel gone before dawn, back after midnight, dark circles under his eyes that I told myself I didn't notice. On the 5th day, Rosa found me in the workroom, hands moving too fast, too sharp across a piece I was ruining on purpose. "You've stopped talking to him," Rosa said. Not a question. "There's nothing to talk about." Rosa set down a tray of tea she hadn't been asked to bring. "He hasn't slept in his own bed in 4 nights. Did you know that? Sits in his study with your mother's old paint box, the one you brought from your father's shop before you'd even unpacked it yourself, just looking at it." My hands stilled over the canvas. "Why would he have that?" "Because he asked me to save it. The week you moved in. Said a woman like you shouldn't lose the only thing left of her mother in a house this big." Rosa's eyes were kind and a little sad. "That man has buried more people than you know, Mrs. Cortez. His mother. His younger brother, shot in a war that wasn't even his to fight, protecting men who never thanked him for it. He doesn't know how to hold on to the things he loves, so he tries to protect them instead. Sometimes too hard. Sometimes too clumsy. But don't mistake clumsy for cold. His family thinks I'm making him weak." "His family," Rosa said flatly, "has never once made that man laugh at his own mistakes the way you did over a ruined sketch." I heard it from the hallway. Do you know how long it's been since I heard Gabriel Cortez laugh in this house? I didn't have an answer for that, either. That night, I found the paper bag Gabriel had left outside my door 4 nights ago, still sitting untouched in the hallway, like even the staff had known not to move it. Inside, a small stick of deep burnt sienna pastel, and a folded note in handwriting I'd never seen before, cramped, careful, like a man unused to writing anything that wasn't a business order. You don't have to open the door. I'll keep leaving these anyway. Gee. I sat on the floor of that hallway for a long time, the note in my hands, before I finally understood what Renzo's voice in the east hallway had actually cost me. I didn't get the chance to fix it that night. The knock came at 11, not Gabriel's knock. Sharp, official. 3 guards deep in the hallway outside my workroom, faces grim in a way that made my stomach drop before anyone said a word. Mrs. Cortez. One of the senior guards, Torres, a man who'd never once addressed me directly before. You need to come with us. Now. Where's Gabriel? There's been an incident at the East Docks. The Doyle family, they'd been feeding information to a rival syndicate for months. Tonight they made their move. His jaw tightened. They know he married for something other than money, Mrs. Cortez. That makes you a target, too. My blood went cold. Is he hurt? He's alive. That's all I can confirm right now. The car ride to the private hospital wing felt endless. Every red light an eternity, every siren in the distance a fresh spike of dread I didn't have a name for yet, because naming it meant admitting how far I'd already fallen for a man I'd sworn I'd never be foolish enough to love. I found him in a hallway outside a surgical suite, jacket torn, blood on his collar that wasn't his own, giving orders in a low, controlled voice to 4 men who looked more frightened of him than of whatever had just happened at the docks. He saw me and stopped mid-sentence. Isabel. I crossed the hallway before he finished my name and did something I hadn't planned, hadn't let myself imagine in 4 days of silence. I put both hands on either side of his face, checking for wounds the way he'd once checked my shoulders in a parking garage, and said, voice shaking, "Are you hurt? Tell me the truth." A graze. Nothing worse. His hand came up, covering mine like he couldn't quite believe I was touching him first. Gabriel, about Renzo. I heard him. And I let it get in my head, and I'm sorry. I should have talked to you instead of hiding behind a locked door. You had every right to hide. His thumb moved once, gently, along my jaw. I've spent my whole life making sure the people I love end up buried or broken. My brother. My mother. I didn't marry you to add your name to that list. And then I heard my own cousin say out loud the exact thing I've been afraid of since the church, that being close to me is the most dangerous thing that could happen to you. I'm not made of glass, Gabriel. I know. His voice broke, just slightly, on the words. I know that better than anyone in this house. I just don't know how to stop being afraid of losing you anyway. Before either of us could say anything else, one of Torres's men came around the corner at a dead run. Sir, it's Renzo. He's the one who tipped off the Doyle family. He's been selling information for 6 months to cover his debts. And tonight, when it went wrong, he tried to use Mrs. Cortez as leverage to buy his way out. Renzo had never hated me. He'd feared what I meant, a wife who made Gabriel Cortez soft enough, human enough to become predictable. And a predictable man was a man who could be cornered. He'd told the rival family exactly when I visited the art district alone. He'd fed them the layout of the house, small details that meant nothing until they meant everything. That night, cornered by his own debts and his own family's suspicion, Renzo had made one last desperate move, offer me up as a bargaining chip to buy himself out of what he owed the Doyle family, a debt built on the very gambling habit Gabriel had quietly covered for years out of a loyalty Renzo had never once earned. Torres laid it all out in the hospital corridor, voice flat with the particular disgust of a man who had once trusted the person he was now describing. Gabriel's face went very still. I had never seen him look like that. Not angry. Not cold. Something colder than both. Where is he now? Being held at the West Warehouse, sir. Waiting on your word. I felt the old fear rise in me, the fear of the man I'd married in a borrowed dress 6 weeks ago, the man capable of the violence everyone in the city whispered about. I braced for him to walk away and become that man completely. Instead, he turned back to me first. "Whatever happens with Renzo happens off these grounds," he said quietly. "Away from you, tonight and always. You will never have to see that side of what I do." That was always the one promise I intended to keep, no matter what else broke between us. His eyes didn't waver. "I won't lie to you about what that means. But I won't let it touch you either." I realized in that moment that this, not the money, not the house, not even the pastels, was the truest thing he'd ever shown me. A dangerous man choosing, even now, exactly where the danger was and was not allowed to reach me. "Then go," I said quietly. "Finish it and come home." Something shifted behind his eyes. Relief, disbelief, something that looked dangerously close to hope. "You'd still call it that? Home?" "Ask me again," I said, "after you've ruined a sketch of my hands a second time. Then I'll tell you for certain." 3 weeks later, the Cortez family held its annual gala, the one event every rival family, ally, and gossip in the city attended, ostensibly to celebrate the year's shipments, actually to take the year's measure of who held power and who had lost it. Renzo's absence was its own kind of announcement. So was the whispering that followed me through the ballroom. The restorer's daughter, some still called me, not unkindly, but not warmly either, wondering aloud within earshot whether Gabriel Cortez's marriage had made him powerful or merely soft. It was Vivian Castellano, matriarch of a rival shipping family and the closest thing Renzo had had to a remaining ally, who said it loudest, raising her glass at the center of the ballroom floor, smiling with the practiced sweetness of a woman who'd waited months for this exact stage. "To Gabriel," she said, "and his lovely little painter. I do hope she's kept your bed warm enough to be worth losing half your board's confidence, darling. Some men trade power for comfort. It happens to the best of us eventually." The ballroom went quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet right before something either breaks or is broken. I felt every eye turn toward me, waiting to see if I'd shrink. I didn't. I set down my own glass and walked to the center of that ballroom floor, in a deep green dress I had painted the fabric for myself, every stroke my own hands, in a house that had tried, gently and clumsily, to give me everything money could buy, and had learned slowly that the only thing I actually wanted was the one thing money never could. "Mrs. Castellano," I said, voice carrying clean across the marble, "I didn't marry Gabriel for comfort. I married him because a debt was called in on a dead man's name, and I had no better choice in front of me at the time." "You're right about that much." A ripple of surprised laughter, uncertain who it was allowed to be laughing at. "But I've learned something in this house that I don't think you understand about power," I continued. "The man you're all afraid of has never once raised his voice to me. Never once broken a promise, even the small ones nobody would have noticed if he had. He sat on my workroom floor at midnight and ruined an entire box of pastels because he couldn't stand the thought of me sitting up there alone. That's not softness, Mrs. Castellano. That's the difference between a man who takes what he wants and a man who earns it slowly, honestly, even when he thinks no one's watching." I turned at last to Gabriel himself, standing at the edge of the room, utterly still, watching me the way he had that very first day in his office, like I was the only unpredictable thing in a life built entirely on control. "I'm not his weakness," I said, loud enough for the whole ballroom, quiet enough that it landed like a vow. "I'm the reason he still has anything worth protecting." Gabriel crossed the ballroom floor in 7 strides, in front of every rival family, every ally, every whispering guest who had spent 6 weeks calling our marriage a transaction. He didn't say a word. He took my face in both hands, the same careful, deliberate grip he'd used checking me for wounds in a parking garage months ago, and kissed me, finally, fully, in front of the entire city that had spent a wedding day watching him kiss my cheek instead. When he finally pulled back, his forehead resting against mine, he said, low enough that only I could hear it, "I have never once been soft. I have only ever been careful with the one thing in this world I couldn't survive losing." Vivian Castellano's smile had gone thin and brittle. No one in that ballroom was laughing anymore. Somewhere behind me, I heard old money murmuring in a language I was only beginning to learn the shape of, not gossip this time, but something closer to recalculation, the sound of a room deciding all at once that it had misjudged the balance of power in front of it. One of the older men on Gabriel's own board, a stiff, silver-haired man named Whitfield, who had never once addressed me directly in 6 months of marriage, approached me afterward with something almost like respect on his face. "Mrs. Cortez," he said, inclining his head slightly. "I confess I doubted the wisdom of this match when it was arranged. I don't doubt it any longer." "I didn't need you to doubt it less, Mr. Whitfield," I said, meeting his eyes evenly. "I only needed everyone in this room to stop deciding what I was capable of without asking me first." He studied me a moment longer, then allowed himself the smallest dry smile a man like that was probably capable of. "Understood," he said, and left it at that. Vivian Castellano did not stay for the rest of the evening. Her family standing in the harbor trade weakened quietly over the following months, the way power always weakens once a room stops being afraid of you. By winter, her name had stopped being spoken in rooms that mattered at all. Renzo's fate was handled quietly off the grounds, exactly as Gabriel had promised, a debt paid the way debts were paid in that world, far from anything I would ever have to witness or carry. The board's questions about Gabriel's judgment found their answer more completely in the sight of me standing unshaken in front of Vivian Castellano than any show of violence could have managed. 6 months later, the workroom at the top of the Cortez house had expanded into a full studio Gabriel had built without telling me, stocked floor to ceiling with pigment in every color he'd learned I loved. My own restorations were sold now under my own name to half the collectors who had once whispered about me. I found him there one evening, sitting on the floor exactly the way he had that first terrible, tender night, a fresh box of pastels in his hand. "You're getting better at this," I said, settling across from him, offering my hand without being asked. "I've had practice." His line was steadier now, the shading clean along my knuckles. "Rosa tells me I still hold the stick wrong." "You do." "I don't care." He looked up at me, and there it was again, the thing I'd learned to recognize as love in a man who'd never once said the word out loud because he didn't need to. "I'll ruin every box in that room if it means you keep letting me sit here." I leaned down, resting my forehead against his the way he had in front of the whole city, and said quietly, "Ask me again if this is home." He didn't have to ask. I could already see the answer in the way his hands, for the first time in his entire dangerous life, had finally stopped being careful and simply, completely, stayed. It was almost a year before the Doyle name stopped meaning anything in that city at all, folded quietly into history the way Renzo had been, and by that I barely thought of either. What I thought of instead was the morning I woke to find Gabriel gone from the bed we now shared without argument, and padded downstairs still half asleep to find him in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, attempting to recreate a bread my mother used to make from a recipe he'd coaxed out of Rosa weeks earlier without telling me why. He burned the first loaf. He burned the second, muttering something under his breath that might have been Italian and might have been a curse word I was slowly learning to recognize in 3 languages. "You could just let me make it," I said, leaning in the doorway, arms crossed, trying not to laugh at the flour dusted across his jaw like he'd lost a fight with the counter. "I wanted it to be something I gave you, not something you had to do yourself, the way you've done everything yourself." He didn't look up from the third attempt, hands deep in dough that was clearly never going to rise correctly. "You shouldn't have to earn comfort in this house. I want you to just be allowed to have it." I crossed the kitchen and took the dough gently out of his hands, covering his fingers with mine, the way he so often covered my hand with careful, unpracticed patience. "Then let me teach you," I said. "That's not the same as doing it for me. That's doing it with me. There's a difference, and I think you're only now starting to learn it." He watched my hands guide his, quiet in the way he only ever was with me, and said, so low I almost missed it entirely, "I used to think the only way to keep anyone safe was to control everything around them. My mother. My brother. Every man who ever worked for me." His eyes lifted to mine, steady now, no longer bracing for the answer the way he had in the hospital corridor all those months ago. "You taught me the safest thing I ever did was let you choose to stay. I didn't choose it right away," I admitted. "I want you to remember that. I fought it. I fought you. I remember every day of it. Something almost like a smile pulled at his mouth. It's the only reason I trust that you're still here now. You never gave me anything you didn't decide for yourself that I'd earned. The bread never did rise properly. We ate the burnt, dense center of it anyway, sitting on the kitchen floor because neither of us wanted to move to the table, laughing at nothing in particular in a way that would have been unthinkable to either of us the night a borrowed veil and a stranger's cold mouth against my cheek had first made me a Cortez in name only. Rosa found us there an hour later, flowers still dusted across the tile, and simply shook her head, muttering something about ruined ovens as she set a fresh pot of coffee on the stove without being asked, the same quiet, asked for care she'd once shown a grieving young bride locking herself into a strange room on her wedding night, now folded easily into the rhythm of an ordinary Tuesday morning. I caught Gabriel's eye over the mess of flour and burnt crust between us and understood all at once that this was what the ending of the fairy tale had actually looked like all along, not a ballroom, not a kiss in front of the whole city, but a kitchen floor on an unremarkable morning. Two people who had once been strangers forced together by a debt, choosing quietly and completely to stay. I had walked into that marriage a debt paid in a woman's name, expecting nothing from the man on the other end of the contract but distance. And if I was honest with myself, in the dark of that first locked room, something worse than distance. I had never expected the door to stay unlocked on its own, months later, simply because I no longer needed it locked at all. I had never expected a dangerous man's hands steadier now than the day he first ruined a box of pastels for my sake, to become the one thing in that enormous, marble, echoing house that finally, quietly, felt like home. Not the marble. Not the money. Not even the name I now carried in front of an entire city. Just his hands, patient at last, and the door between us that no longer needed a lock at all. Would you have stood in that ballroom and defended him out loud in front of the whole city the way I did?